what I reckon. So we got 2 little lectures today. We'll finish this one and get partway through the next one, I think is what we'll do. So this first topic is about, well, it's intercultural information ethics. The idea being that how do different cultures, how are they affected by technology differently, and how might they affect technology differently? So are there any special challenges that come from being in a different culture? Well, maybe. And so that's what we kind of want to look at here, right? So in this particular lesson, we'll look at, I guess we'd say, Eastern versus Western cultures. And sort of being here in the Middle East, we're sort of halfway in between that. So it's probably something that we might look at. Are there any, yes, we're going to highlight this concept of privacy from a cultural perspective. Is there a cultural perspective to privacy? And perhaps there is. So, as it says here, we have this term, which is Intercultural Information Ethics. So we use this acronym to refer to it, IIE. And actually, in your, if you look on the contents for this lesson, you'll find that there's like a 30-page chapter from a book, or there's a report there that is about this concept. So this concept is not something that was spoken about 30 years ago. It's sort of a new area of discussion. I get that IT people have sort of realized it's that is an issue that needs to be considered, I suppose, that wasn't necessarily considered previously. So as it says there, the problem could arise from the fact that information technology is going to be implemented globally. So you might have a particular information technology service that is implemented globally, and then that's going to be used by different people who have different cultures, and so that's going to impact them differently, and their relation to it is going to be different as well. So so that raises this question: well, can we measure that? Can we see, do people in different cultures look at the technology differently, and how does that affect them? Particularly, we're going to talk about, as I said, about privacy. So, and as it says here, in different cultures, that may be looked at differently. What might be seen as good in one culture is seen as good, but maybe with a little different emphasis in another culture. And yeah, so let's have a look at that. So one of those, so actually, here's a few of these. The sense of time. Apparently, this is a thing. I know that, so for example, if you went to Germany or Japan, their emphasis on time is really quite strict, right? So, I mean, just going across the Rhine River into France, you get, and so, I mean, they're basically the same people, you'd think. But so you have this cultural sort of difference, which is looked upon in how do we approach time. So, I mean, the old saying is, right, you know, the German people, if you have a meeting with them, you arrive like 15 minutes early because everybody else arrives 15 minutes early. Whereas in other cultures, they are a little bit more relaxed about that because time doesn't have quite the same meaning. That's the idea there. Of course, we know that there's different religions, and religions do come with some cultural aspects to them. I'm not suggesting that those two things are related, because perhaps they're not. But colors, in the notes, if you read the textbook chapter, apparently the colors red and white have some kind of special significance in Japan. Yeah, their flag's red and white, so maybe that's a thing. And also in Islam, the color green has a special significance. So I suppose if you're using those in your websites, you know, it might mean something to people, but doesn't mean anything to other people. Yeah, there's a emphasis on privacy. Now, with the Chinese thing, I guess I think the main concept here that they're trying to understand between sort of Far Eastern and Western culture with regard to privacy, it could be looked at from the point of view of individualist versus more collective idea. Do you know what I mean by individualist versus collective? So, I mean, if you define yourself more as being a part of a group, then we'd say that that's a collective. Or if you define yourself as being just an individual, that's a more individualist thing. And certainly in the West, over the last 200 years, since what we called the Enlightenment, and you can look at that word however you like, but since the Enlightenment in the West, what we've got is a very much more individualistic thing, to the point where we focus on a nuclear family as opposed to a multi-generational family, to the point where nationalism is, you know what I mean by nationalism? Nationalism where you look at yourself as being part of a nation, and that has often had an ethnic component. Do you know what I mean by these words that I'm using? An ethnic component. So, for example, you had the nation of the Germans, which I mentioned, right? So, where they saw themselves as being related to each other, like a bunch of tribes. And who would see themselves as separate from the nation of the French, or the nation of the Poles, or the nation of the Italians. And so, and they would say that, well, we're this ethnic group. And that's very much sort of not the way that the West is now. They tend to be sort of much more sort of, atomized, or people seem to be just individuals within this sort of, Anyways, that is not the same in the East, from my understanding, which people do have some kind of attachment to a particular people, which we don't see in the West. And so how does that work with Chinese privacy? I think this comes in the other one, where we have this idea of equilibrium. So if you are totally atomized and every person is just an individual, and I think that's where we've got to in the West, then your privacy is your personal privacy, right? That's what you try and sort of protect. Okay, so you could have privacy from everybody, right? Privacy from your spouse, from your children, from your parents. And so that is sort of elevated as a high sort of ideal. Whereas as we see here in the Chinese, they will say we have this idea of equilibrium where privacy is not necessarily an individual thing. We have to balance the privacy of the individual with the privacy of the group. So they actually have this idea of the privacy of the group and the benefit of the group, and not an individual. Now, when I say that's an Eastern thing, that's just the way that has evolved. And as I said, if you went to Germany 100 years ago, they were the same. You know what I mean? They considered them, or at least you had a political movement which looked upon the collective as an ideal. And that has, because of things that happened since then, we had World War II, and that was just a terrible thing. The bad things that happened in World War II in Europe, a lot of that was blamed on the idea that we had these collectives that didn't really help us. They turned us, so we had groups of people turning against other groups of people. And so we want to not do that again. And that, I don't believe that's happened in the East to the extent that it did in the West. And you can take that how you like. I think that might be a sad thing for the West, but how do we get back to having some kind of identity which holds a nation together? And so the Chinese would say well, yes, they definitely look at it that way. And if you looked at Japan, the same. They have this idea of the nation. They have this idea of a group of people. And so your privacy is not just your individual privacy. It includes that other group of people. And all right, so the thing about likewise in the Thai, I don't feel I'm really that qualified to speak about the Thai culture, other than what there is on the things. I've been to Thailand a couple of times, but I haven't really noticed this. What I noticed in Thailand is everybody was really kind of polite. But I kind of noticed that almost in most places I go to, like everybody here is kind of polite. But apparently there's a fairly strong sort of hierarchy. So if you were part of a family, the older individuals in the family would have a higher status than the younger individuals. And that's not an uncommon thing, is it? That's not an uncommon thing. We see that in lots of other cultures. So your privacy would then be limited to within that group. And, you know, whatever that hierarchy sort of worked on. So I suppose that means that, so for example, your grandfather or your grandmother would have some power over that privacy situation. And then as it says there, there's the concept of non-confrontation and losing face. And that's apparently, people talk about that as being an issue in the Far East. Certainly diplomats, when they go and do negotiations with like Chinese, you have to be careful not to be in a situation where the person is seen to lose face. Yeah, that's quite different, I suppose, than what we'd see in these atomized situations in some countries in the West. So how does that affect things in terms of IT? I guess in terms of IT, you'd have to say, we got the situation where IT is pretty much driven out of Silicon Valley in the United States. Silicon Valley has mostly absorbed the cultural ideas of the West. Some of those things that I mentioned, you know, very atomized. However, those things would be changing over time as a lot of people move to Silicon Valley from other countries. I would say that. Anyways, I hope that you got something out of that. No, it's kind of a weird one. Right, so I've got another lesson to give you, I think. I can find it. And so we'll just do this quickly. I'm just gonna go through maybe, so lecture 2. We'll just go through maybe 12 slides of this other one, and then we'll go on and you'll have a break and you can do your quiz. Any questions on the other one? You got the idea, right? So this one is a little bit more technical, this little lesson. So what we're talking about is hacking, basically security issues and ethics regarding those. So about cyber conflict, cyber attacks, and cyber security. Some of you may go on and do a degree, because a degree is offered here in cybersecurity, and that's a very useful degree because it's such a big issue. So it's such a big issue because you have a lot of people that are actually spending a lot of their effort to try and break security of various computer systems. And those people, when I say there's a lot of people, some of them include governments. So you do have people that are active as individuals trying to attack various computer systems, but you also have governments which attack the systems of other governments. And that goes on a lot. And so now, for example, we've got a situation in Europe where Russia and Ukraine are having a very active war. And so Russia's got its allies, not many, and Ukraine has its allies, and they're busy attacking each other they're attacking each other's computer systems. And yeah, so yeah, expect that. And also China and the United States, they attack each other all the time on a routine basis, I think, in terms of cybersecurity, and Russia as well, as well as individuals. So I hope it's obvious why we need to have strong security to sort of protect ourselves against cyber attacks. Now that we have internet, everyone is connected to the internet, it seems. So that means that somebody sitting in a basement in Ukraine or Romania or Russia could perhaps launch an attack on you in your things. I don't know if you guys ever heard of SUSNet. Any of you ever hear of SUSNet? SUSNet was an attack by the Israeli and some say that the Americans helped them with it, government, which attacked the uranium enrichment in Iran. And so that was, I don't know, it was like 10 years ago, something like that. So basically what happened there is that a virus, which was a SUSNet virus, somehow got onto the computers, which controlled the, it spins and separates things by how, what do you call those? Centrifuges. The centrifuges at the atomic enrichment plant, or one of the atomic enrichment plants in Iran. And what the virus did is it changed the speed of the centrifuges, sort of imperceptible or not noticeable to the operators, and basically ruined them. I mean, basically broke the centrifuges, and that sort of set them back years in their nuclear research. And I mean, Google it if you want, Stuxnet, and you'll find articles where the Israelis are sort of gloating about this, oh yeah, that was really, really cool that we did there, and I don't know what the Iranians said, probably not something so cool, but yeah, so that would be an example of it, of a cyber attack. Now, they didn't do that through the internet because the Iranians are not going to have their nuclear research connected to the internet, because they need to have some security. So what actually happened is, they think what happened is somebody came with a thumb drive or something like that, and a thumb drive ended up getting onto a computer, and then the virus spread from there. And yeah, so the only point that I want to make out of this is governments do this, all right? And you may be familiar with something a little bit closer to home here in Qatar. Remember we weren't allowed to go to UAE for a few years. All right, so what happened before that? Well, you might remember that there were people here that were saying that the UAE had hacked their computers, and people had said certain things, and that was supposed to be private, and then it ended up on Al Arabiya News. And then so, yeah, so I mean, it can be something as simple as that, which is not, breaking somebody's privacy, or it could be worse than that, where you're actually attacking their infrastructure. And there's more examples of that. So you could attack infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure is very vulnerable. You could shut down power plants. You could shut down airports by attacking people's computer systems. Yeah, you could make a kind of, if you're pretty good at it, you could make a pretty mess of a country. You could cause a lot of trouble just by doing things on computers. And so that's why we probably need to have some skilled people to be able to stop that kind of thing. Okay, so as it says there's some trade-offs involved with that. What if we wanted to just make sure that there was no attacks ever to our systems? Well, there would be some some cost to that. Besides, so I mentioned governments. What about ordinary companies? Do they get attacked? Well, yeah. And so then this slide is mentioning that, well, you have to sort of come up with some kind of an approach to that. Maybe you're going to have a ransomware. You guys heard of the ransomware things? Places that I do, that I, as a customer, I've done business with companies in the United States where I had a week where I couldn't do any business with them. as a customer, simply because they were subject to a ransomware attack. And I know that because they sent me a message saying, sorry, our service is not available at the moment. We have a ransomware attack and we're doing what we can to fix it. Well, what did they do to fix it? I don't know. Maybe they paid. You know what I mean? They're not going to tell you, are they? But, you know, so they would have had to go through these decisions, you know, should we pay them or should we come up with some other things? You know, that there will be a lot of sort of business decisions there on that. Yeah. The suggestion there is as we increase our complexity, and I guess you could say as we increase the amount that we use of our computers, then we open ourselves up to more attacks. If everything is computerized, right, like your traffic system's all computerized, your water purification is computerized, and it is, right? You're here in Qatar, this country is so lucky it has a lot of oil and gas, but those refineries, they're computerized. You know what I mean? Even the extraction, it's computerized. So I mean that there's a lot of vulnerability there for people to sort of do things with computer attacks on those. So yeah, as things become more technical, there's more problems that we could have. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of BYOD. BYOD means bring your own device, and you guys are doing that. I'm doing that. This is my own device. I can use this and I can access all of the college systems. Okay, so that means that the college is vulnerable because I could come in and I could have something on here that, you know, maybe I log into a system and transfer a virus over there or whatever. So there's a lot of sort of issues with BYOD. The cat's out of the bag on BYOD because everybody's using it. You know what I mean? 10 years ago, you could have said, oh, well, we'll restrict. We won't let people use BYOD. But now, because we have mobile phones, which will do the things that a computer will do, and everybody's using a mobile phone and everybody's connecting with Wi-Fi, yeah, you have to sort of accept that. And so how do we allow people to bring their own device, which may be compromised? I mean, any one of you or me could be walking around with a mobile phone which got all kinds of viruses on it. So how do we let that connect to our network? So what are we going to do to make sure that risk is managed? There's oh, it's probably on a later slide, but there's a lot of sort of things that they can do with that, sort of to separate those vulnerabilities from the network. And so yeah, so we're using that word, a vulnerability. If there's a weakness in your software, we call that a vulnerability. If somebody then takes that weakness and comes up with an attack based on that weakness, we call that an exploit. And so we use those terms. You will have noticed if you're using software that connects to the internet a lot, that from time to time, you'll get a situation which will say update the app, or update your operating system, or update your mobile phone operating system. Me personally, whenever I see those, I always accept it. And the reason why I do is because a lot of the time, the update is because they have found out that their software has a weakness, and they have found out that somebody has created an exploit for that weakness, and that means that your software and your device is now open to attack. And so then the people who are supporting that software, and it could be an operating system like Windows will tell you, you know, here's an update, right? And you think, oh yeah, that's nice. Now my pictures will be nicer or something like that. That's a little thing, right? The big thing there is that you're probably going to have some protection from an exploit that they have discovered. So that they'll put, we'll call it a patch or whatever. And so that you could be protected from that exploit. So we have these special terms like a zero-day attack, as it says there, that we realize that on such a point that this exploit became active, and that's what we're going to call our 0 day. A lot of different terms here that you may have heard of. I don't know, have you heard of these? Black hat hacker, white hat hacker. maybe the white hat is on the other side, other slide, I mean. So a black hat, obviously, that's somebody who's trying to break computer systems, and yeah, it's a cracker, causes problems, steals data. Malicious insider, that's somebody that works for your company. And so they're an employee that's going to do harm to you, your company. Industrial spy is going to take your secrets and give them to somebody else. And cyber criminal, they do something that's illegal. Hacktivist. So a hacktivist is somebody who's doing politics. So why do we say that? Because they're like activists. So basically that they would be maybe exploiting computers, but because they have some political agenda. Cyber terrorist is kind of a little bit like that too, but a bit more dramatic, that they're maybe trying to destroy some government or banks or something like that. Ransomware, we mentioned. Somebody will, what they tend to do is they lock computers, and these guys get a message that comes up, you know, if you want to have access to your computer systems, you know, send, you know, 2,000 Bitcoins to this address or something like that. So actually that's a strong argument that some people had against Bitcoin, is because they'd say, well, you can't really track it. And so criminals like to use it. You know, it's part of like the dark web or whatever. Virus I've already mentioned. So what's the difference between a virus and a worm? So your worm has a broader scope, I suppose you could say, and its attack is going to be more quick. The difference is that a virus has to be, there's like a trigger on a virus, and somebody has to kick the virus off to get it started. Whereas with the worm, it will just propagate on its own. So you know what I mean? There, you get a bit of software, it's got a virus on it, and you have to sort of click on it, and then the virus happens. Whereas the worm, as soon as it gets onto your system, it just goes for it. Trojan horses. A Trojan horse, that's from the myth, the Greek myth, where there was a horse outside the city of Troy, and inside the horse was some soldiers. And so when the people opened the gate, they pulled the horse in, and then the soldiers came out at night and opened up the gates so that the city could be attacked. So the idea of a Trojan horse is you have this thing which you like. Trojan horse was like a gift, this thing that you like, but inside it is something nasty. And that typically you would have a virus would be inside of another computer program, and the other computer program might be useful. And so you have some virus scanning software that can help you sort of get out of that. Blended threat, well, it's just might be a mixture of this, a worm, a virus, and a Trojan horse sort of together. Denial of service, distributed denial of service. If you can somehow from a single location or from multiple locations, if you can instruct a bunch of computers to become bots for you, and these computers will then all attack a particular system, you can make the system run slowly and maybe make the system stop. Because so for example, if it's a website, the website might have something like whenever a person goes and visits the website will communicate back to them, right? So if you can have it so that this all happens at once, like 1,000 people, but it's not 1,000 people, it's just 1,000 bots, you know, trying to communicate with the website, you can slow it down, maybe to the point of it not working anymore. So that would be a denial of service, distributed denial of service attack. The website isn't broken, it's just that for a few seconds or a few days or a few minutes, anybody who's trying legitimately to access that website might find that it runs so slowly or not at all that it's not useful to them. A rootkit. So you could have a rootkit. Well, typically people will carry those around with them on a thumb drive. So they got their rootkit on the thumb drive, and if they can get to your computer, the rootkit will basically go into the part of the hard drive on your computer where the basic of your operating system is, and install over top of it, and that will give them control over your computer. So all your password that you were using to protect your computer, all that's gone. They just go and do everything they want with a rootkit. Advanced persistent threat, somebody's like lurking on your system and sort of scanning stuff as they want it, and then to make attacks later. Spam, I think you know about that. You all get it in your email. Phishing, somebody will, there's all kinds of phishing. They might just call you up and say, oh, you know, can you please give me this number, and then you're going to win a prize or something like that. I mean, we've all had those, right? Where you get the SMS message, you know, you've got a Aramex package, but you have to pay, you know, $10 for it, right? And there's no Aramex package, you know, it's just somebody wants to get your credit card details. And so they might call you up, they might send you an email, they might send you an SMS. Spear phishing is kind of a variation on that, but what is it's highly targeted, that they know a particular person has something that would use. And there's smishing, a combination of those things, SMS, WhatsApp, etc. Voicemail, yeah, okay. I don't know if I have to sort of mention those. I think they're kind of self-explanatory. Cyber espionage, using the computer system to be a spy, get information from about military, political things. Cyber terrorism. If you could make an attack on a, well, I think like an airport or a water plant, a power plant, that could cause a lot of harm, right? I mean, it's just, well, when I say cause a lot of harm, you cause a lot of suffering. So, I mean, imagine here in Qatar, if somebody had some kind of terrible attack that they did on a computer, and that stopped the airport from working, and it stopped the water plant from working. You know, within a few days, people would start suffering. And so that would be cyber terrorism. All right. I think, yeah, should we continue? How many of these have we got? I was going to go to like number 12 or something. I think I'll make this one the last slide. The black hat hacker. So they're just doing things to mess up systems. We have this idea of a white hat hacker. And basically the idea there is we have good guys, you could say, right? And some of these good guys might be reformed bad guys, because that actually has happened, you know, where people have been proven to be pretty good hackers, and they've done things with a malicious intent, and then they've gone and worked for cybersecurity companies because they know what the bad guys are going to do, right? And so that they might get a job now as a good guy. But basically, you don't have to be a bad guy to become a white hat hacker. You can go to university, and there are several universities which have courses in cybersecurity, and they have this thing called pen testing. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Pen is short for penetration. And so people will just get a bunch of tools, and they'll just go into an office and a business that has computer systems and say, okay, over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to try and attack your system. And you're going to pay me, and I'm going to attack your system. And then I'm going to give you a report that tells you what's all the weaknesses. And then we're going to fix them. And, you know, you won't lose any data, but I'm going to pretend that I'm trying to break your system, but I'm not going to really break it. I'm just going to find all the places where it could be broken. And that's pen testing. And a white hat hacker would do that. And as I said, there are universities that offer degrees in that. Probably they would have, this university may as well. A gray hat hacker, well, that sounds like a mix between a black hat and a white hat. And where do we draw the line? You know, so maybe the person does some sort of testing and then says, well, you know, I'll go along to them and help them fix it. Maybe they can pay me, but we didn't have a prior arrangement. So, you know what I mean? With the white hat hacker, before you do the hacking, you sat down with the people and said, we're going to try this. We agree. I'm going to try and break your system. But the gray hat hacker might not have had that kind of agreement. And so the agreement comes later. All right. So I think that's enough for today. So